Okay, first of all, just want to welcome each of you that's joining us today, both guests and staff and members of the board, and specifically the new members. Welcome and thank you for your interest in being part of the Huron County Economic Development Board, and we really appreciate that. And to echo what Tina said, we're looking forward to what's coming ahead and working with each of you. So welcome and thank you for joining us. And by way of disclaimer, the Economic Development Board meetings are available live through Zoom, and recordings may be posted online on Huron County's YouTube channel. You may be seen and or heard as part of these broadcasts, and your name, comments, and or presentation materials will become part of the public record. So we're going to dive right into our agenda. And I'm going to call this meeting to order. And the first on the agenda is the election of a chair for the next 2-year term. And I'd be looking for nominations for a chair for the Economic Development Board. Trevor?
I would nominate Brian Vincent to be the chair, please.
Okay. And I'm going to ask a second time, is there any nominations for a chair for the board? Seeing none, for a third and final call, is there any other nominations for chair for the board? Seeing none, I'm going to ask Brian. Brian, are you willing to stand for the position of chair? You're muted, Brian.
Yes, I will. Thank you.
Then we would be looking for a motion then to nominate the chair, Brian Vincent, for the Economic Development Board 25 and 26. Do I have a mover and a seconder for that? So Trevor Bazinet and Glenn McNeil would second that. And I'm going to call the question. Those in favor? And that is carried. So Brian, it is my pleasure to be able to turn the meeting over to you as the chair for the next remainder of the term of council. And thank you, Brian, for having the interest, and I'll turn the meeting over to you now.
Great. Well, thank you, Warden Heffer, and I will add his welcome to everyone here to our meeting, especially our new members, Roz, Sweat, Azra, and John. And we've had one meeting with Mayor Trevor, but he's new on the board as well. So welcome, and as Vicky said, we'll do that a little later. So our next duty here is a motion to nominate a vice chair for the Economic Development Board. Have someone make a motion or nominate someone. Jamie, Warden Heffer.
I'd nominate Tina Bax.
Seconder for that. Past Warden McNeil. Any other nominations? As we know, we got to do this 3 times. Any other nominations? Is there any other nominations for vice chair? So having heard that, then can I have a mover and a seconder to close nominations? Moved by the warden, seconded by past Warden McNeil. Any more discussion? Then all those in favor of the motion? Carried. Thank you. Congratulations, Tina.
Thank you very much, people, for the confidence and the opportunity.
So next on the agenda is actually approving our agenda. We have a motion available for us that's in the agenda sent out to you. Can I have a mover and a seconder to accept those? Mayor Trevor and Lynn is our seconder. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. So we're on to 4, declaration of pecuniary interest and the general nature thereof. Does anyone here feel that they have an interest, pecuniary interest, in what's coming up on the agenda? Seeing none, then we will move on to 5, which is the minutes of the previous meeting. We have a motion that's on the agenda. Any errors, omissions that anyone has seen in the minutes of our December meeting? Seeing none, then I will ask for a mover and a seconder to accept those minutes.
So move.
That's Warden McNeil, seconded by Derek. Any more discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. So we're moving along then to 6 on our agenda. Scotiabank economic update presented by John Fanjoy, the economist with Bank of Nova Scotia. I thank him for being here. Appreciate your insight into all this. This is certainly this month of January is a little scary for all of us, so your insights will be much appreciated. So I'll turn it over to you, John.
Well, thanks very much, everybody, for having me. As part of the presentation for the economic update, is it okay if I share my slides?
Yes, please.
So I'll give that a moment or two to load. But for those that don't know me, hi, everybody. My name is John Fanjoy. I'm an economist with the Scotiabank Economics Department. I've been with the bank since about mid-2021, joining the Economics Department as an analyst. And then since the beginning of 2023, have been in the economist position. So today's presentation will largely be a little bit of a recap of what's been going on in the Canadian economy over the past couple of years in order to be able to understand where we are today and how we got here, in order to then look ahead in terms of our forecasts that we refreshed back in December, in order to be able to say, okay, here's what potential risks are to the outlook, what we might see from a monetary policy stance, inflation, economic activity, labor markets. Most of the assumptions that I think would be notable from our forecasts, we did include some developments based on the election in the U.S. Incoming U.S. President-elect Trump has mentioned on the campaign trail and previously plans to lower taxes in the U.S. So we've started to incorporate some of that into our forecasts, change in immigration policies. The biggest uncertainty as of right now is the possibility of any potential trade barriers through tariffs. And so I'll discuss that towards the end of the presentation, but we have done minor incremental adjustments and introduction of tariffs into the forecasts. How much or how little those will be changing our outlook really depend on what ends up happening over the next coming period. From a Canadian policies perspective, I think one of the most notable adjustments to our forecast relative to previously is the change in immigration policy in Canada. And so we've started to implement that into our forecasts as well. But the degree to which that develops going forward really is a bit data dependent. But I'll go into further detail later about some of those, risks to the outlook. In the meantime, so what we've seen throughout a lot of the past couple of years is quite a bit of resilience from the Canadian economy, recovering through the pandemic, elevated inflation that peaked in 2022, also having very volatile international commodity prices, whether that's through oil and gas or minerals and rare materials and metals, all of which is vital for Canada's economy as an international and very open to trade economy. That's very resource rich. And then when looking at the developments a little bit more granularly, so while economic activity as measured through GDP has slowed over the past couple of years, it has maintained a bit more of a positive stance, driven a large part through persistence in consumer spending towards goods and services, notably with goods kind of picking up back in 2024. And a large part of that has to do with the fact that we have seen strong population growth. When you're looking at overall total household consumption that had been increasing in dollar terms, and then in real per capita terms had actually been declining as the Bank of Canada hiked their policy rate in order to slow economic activity, to be able to bring inflation back down from the very strong levels. So those are some of the developments that we've started to see. In 2024, the household consumption per capita, measured in real terms, adjusting for inflation, the decline in that really had started to slow down, even with still strong population growth, showing that it could be the case that the full effects of previous monetary policy hikes from the Bank of Canada have kind of reached their peak, and then with the Bank of Canada easing their policy rate, that should be feeding in a little bit going forward into household consumption. And then measured in per capita terms really is dependent on what we see with immigration levels going forward. However, that period of slower growth in the Canadian economy was a contributing factor to seeing headline and core inflation decline from peak levels, especially high levels from headline inflation in 2022, reaching at about 8%. And so for the past quite a few months, past couple of quarters, inflation year-over-year measures have been within the Bank of Canada's 1% to 3% target range, which bodes well from a monetary easing perspective, where the Bank of Canada has been able to lower their policy rate. And with a lot of the assumptions mentioned earlier, we continue to expect that inflation will remain around that 2% target, being a little bit volatile, but remaining around the midpoint of the Bank of Canada's target range over the next 2 years. A large part of the decline had started off with slowing of goods inflation, where services inflation had been quite sticky, hovering around 4% year over year. But we've started to see that decline as well. Risks to the inflation outlook really are heavily dependent on some of the developments going forward, which I'll discuss towards the end of the presentation. But absent any major deviations from the assumptions in our forecast, we can expect that inflation maybe isn't necessarily the same pressure that we had seen over the past couple of years. Meanwhile, in the US, a little bit south of the border, as it ties to the US economy through Canada's openness to trade, we've seen very sticky inflation. It has come down quite a bit south of the border, but still remains around just under 3%, depending on whether you're looking at headline or core inflation year over year. But given the persistence of still sticky inflation that has not come down towards 2% as quickly as it has here in Canada, it is very likely that the US Federal Reserve could maintain a bit more of a strict or restrictive monetary policy stance than we're seeing in Canada. So tying into to what we've seen from interest rates across the economy, a little bit of a recap: the Bank of Canada hiked their policy rate to a peak of 5%, and then since June of 2024 had lowered that down to about 3.25% by the end of last year. And so really the majority of that interest rate declines from the monetary policy stance had been occurring in a very rapid period of time. And while we know that monetary policy works with a lag, we have started to see a bit of easing, if not reemergence from consumer spending and interest sensitive components. And so that's part of the reason why we think that, just given that with some of the assumptions in our forecasts, the risk to the outlook may not see necessarily much more easing from the Bank of Canada, all else being equal. So we could see one, maybe two more cuts to the Bank of Canada's policy rate, reaching 3% sometime by the middle of this year, with potential chances of cuts beyond that. Meanwhile, south of the border in the US, the Federal Reserve has cut their policy rate by 100 basis points from a peak 5.5% for their upper bound all the way down to 4.5%. And given the still strong persistence in economic activity in the US, they continue to run a positive output gap, which is leading to some of that persistence in inflation. We don't necessarily think that they'll be as quick in the coming months or the coming quarters to lower their policy rate as they had been towards the end of 2024. Now, what does that mean for Canada's economy, especially as it relates to trade? What we've seen is that, just given some of the strong differential between the policy rates in Canada and the US, it's around recent historic highs. And so that's one of the main drivers for strength of the US dollar and relative weakness from the Canadian dollar's perspective. Having reached about $1.44 Canadian over the past couple of weeks relative to the US dollar, or translating it to about 70 cents US per Canadian dollar. But the majority of that has to do with also a lot of the uncertainty effect just given that the US dollar is generally considered a reserve currency used in international markets. That does put a little bit of favoring towards the US dollar with still elevated policy rate from the Federal Reserve. So in this instance, a stronger US dollar relative to Canadian dollar should, improve or make Canadian exports to the US a little bit more attractive from a cost competitive stance. So it does aid the attractiveness of exports, which should help with some of the recovery in Canadian economic activity in 2025. But at the same time, a weaker Canadian dollar does mean that there is, just given the strong interconnectedness of North American supply chains, potential risk for a little bit higher costs being imported through the input goods into Canada from the US, leading to potential risks around the inflation outlook. And so that's some of the differences between Canada and the US and how it might relate going forward, just under the baseline assumptions that we've included so far. And so through the Bank of Canada's monetary policy easing since the middle of 2024, we have seen that it is carrying through to a lot of the other borrowing costs in Canada. When you're looking at, for example, the car loan interest rate, average car loan interest rate has declined over the past couple of months, if not quarters as well. The 5-year Government of Canada yield is generally considered a good benchmark for where the 5-year mortgage rates are or may be headed. And so we've seen declines in the 5-year Government of Canada yield, which should be passing through into borrowing costs, especially as it relates towards consumer spending on shelter and housing. And so this is where monetary policy does act with a little bit of a lag, and we've started to see the first round effects. But going forwards to the next couple of quarters, we could start to see a little bit more of a pickup in interest-sensitive economic activity, just from the previous policy rate cuts and interest rate declines as those work their way through the economy. Meanwhile, in the US, with a little bit less easing from the US Federal Reserve's policy rate, that's should be passing through a little bit more slowly, but starting to see still some response south of the border. And when it comes to aggregate household spending capacity, with still strong savings rate relative to pre-pandemic, looking through most of the 2010s, even to early 2000s, that higher savings rate from a higher interest rate environment, there is a little bit of flexibility for consumers to be reducing their savings rate and seeing a pickup in household consumer spending as some of the drivers for growth into 2025. Especially when you're looking at it from the fact that a lot of the decline in debt servicing costs through lower principal borrowing levels should be able to be offset with, or offsetting some of the decline in the interest rate costs. And we have started to see a pickup in economic activity in some of these interest rate sectors over the past couple of months. We've seen that residential home sales are starting to pick back up again as interest rates decline, and consumers and Canadians are looking into whether or not now would be a good time into re-entering the housing market as prospective buyers or any prospective sellers as well. Other interest rate sensitive component is automotive sales, which had been facing a little bit of a different story with supply constraints throughout the 2021-2022 period. And so while we did see a little bit of declines in seasonally adjusted vehicle sales in Canada through the middle of last year, they did start to pick back up again towards the end of the year. Tying us into the interest sensitive, to the labor markets, while we have seen the unemployment rate in Canada increase from a low of 5% at the beginning of 2023 up to about 6.5% or so over the past couple of months, a lot of that really has to do with the fact that the strong population growth through elevated immigration has been the main driver for that increase in the unemployment rate. The Canadian economy had seen slower job gains towards the end of the summer months last year, but generally had been on aggregate from a 6-month, 12-month moving average being quite positive. And so when you're looking at some of the softness in the labor markets, that's really been hitting the youth and temporary residents, new to Canada demographics a lot harder than some of those born in Canada or well-established in Canada immigrants, where they've seen still relatively lower unemployment rates relative to those more harder hit groups like youths and temporary residents. And so for that core working age demographic, the labor markets do support a little bit of that return to consumption as interest rates decline. So talking just a little bit about one of the major known domestic Canadian policy risks to the outlook, largely has to do with the shift in immigration policy, especially as had been announced at the end of October of 2024, where the federal government had announced decreases in the permanent residence admissions targets, and for the first time introduced non-permanent residence targets as well. And so should the level of immigration align with what the federal government had included in their assumptions back in October, that could actually see population growth completely stall over the next couple of years in Canada. So our assumptions prior to that had been that Canada's population growth would be about 1.5% in 2025 and 1% or so in 2026. Taking into account some of the developments that we've seen in terms of more strict requirements for issuing visas, or changes to the LMIA requirements, we now have been cutting back on our population growth assessment to about 1% in 2025, 0.5% in 2026. However, this also does have a major data dependency in terms of how successful the government is with following through with their plans. In some instance where we have as a alternative scenario that we presented, scenario 3, where they actually overcorrect relative to where they had believed immigration could end up going. And so what this could mean for Canadian labor markets is that through slower population growth, we might actually see a little bit more tightening in labor markets. With the unemployment rate starting to decline, could start to see a little bit more wage gains from that perspective in Canada through tighter labor markets, which with still low productivity does lead to risks of higher inflation when you're still seeing strong wage gains that are not being offset by positive or strong productivity growth. Meanwhile, the greatest risk really that's an uncertainty in our outlook really has to do with any potential risks of trade barriers being imposed with incoming US President-elect Trump talking throughout the campaign trail and in recent months since being elected. The plans to impose tariffs across a variety of international trading partners and notably within Canada. So what we have done in our December outlook is introduce some tariff barriers of about 5% on half of goods from Canada to the US. But really the different scenarios that are being floated, whether it's by Trump himself or some of his advisors and campaign group members, is much higher levels of tariffs than that, all of which would very likely to be a huge drag on the Canadian economy when looking at it from a weakened US demand for Canadian goods perspective. That would then put downward pressure on inflation, and we could actually potentially see further policy rate cuts from the Bank of Canada, lowering their policy rate much more than the 3% we have currently in our forecast by the end of this year. However, that would be in an instance where Canada does not necessarily retaliate with tariffs in kind, especially given the comments from political leaders and political members of all stripes at various levels, provincial, federal. It would be very likely to, or much more likely to see some sort of retaliation if the US were to impose tariffs. And so this would then lead to higher import costs from the US into Canada, which could actually reignite inflation and potentially risk seeing the Bank of Canada hold a much more strict policy rates in the near and medium term, or even having to hike their policy rate again in response to this shocks and how it might impact inflation. And then in terms of how this would impact economic growth, tariffs of all levels would pretty much weigh on economic activity. Obviously, with the stronger or higher tariffs having more drag on Canadian economic growth over the next couple of years, where any retaliation would see a bigger drag on economic activity. This would also then tie into softer labor markets, whether it's through weaker US demand for Canadian goods. Business uncertainty also would play a role in terms of hiring plans, And so how that might tie in and develop really remains uncertain, as it's more of a wait and see as we're looking into the next couple of weeks. Alternatively, though, at the same time, tariffs of any kind would also have a drag on U.S. economic activity and labor markets to a much smaller degree than they would on Canada, just given the difference in size of the two economies and Canada's exposure and openness to trade. What we had seen during Trump's first presidency was that Canada did respond with tariffs of their own, although to a much more targeted degree than is being discussed at this time. And so it could be much more likely that with the U.S. imposing tariffs of broad swaths across a broad swath of different Canadian goods and services, that they would respond in kind, which would then have a bit more of a drag on the U.S. And so we've presented a couple different tariff scenarios and what that might mean over the longer run to U.S. economic activity. But all else being equal, as mentioned, we have included some minor tariffs into our December forecast. We would expect that Canadian economic activity and Canadian economic growth in 2025 would pick up from about the 1.5% we've seen over the past couple of years, closer to 2% throughout 2025, before starting to see growth slow again a little bit in 2026 onwards, just as tariffs do act and where with a bit of a lag from their full effects being seen. Meanwhile, the U.S., with still restrictive monetary policy rates south of the border and still strong growth in the past couple of quarters, we would expect that to normalize a little bit more so over the next 2 years. And so with that, I have included in some of the materials different forecasts from our outlook, as well as different tables from our scenarios. But if anybody has any questions.
Thank you, John.
All right, has anyone got questions for John? I'm sure there must be some. Susan, can you put us back to a full screen? There we go. Yeah, Derek, go ahead.
I'd just like to get your views on what these tariff scenarios have in store for our Canadian dollar. Does it continue to slide, versus the US dollar? Is it a factor of the Canadian dollar being weaker on the global scale, or is it just the US dollar showing so much strength that's putting all this pressure on the Canadian dollar?
No, that's a very good question, and really one that, given Canada's openness to trade, it is one that everybody kind of needs to keep an eye on. The threat of tariffs has kind of been broad swaths across all major trading partners, especially around China, Canada, US. And so that's where we're seeing a lot of strength in the US dollar across a lot of other international currencies. So this weakness in the Canadian dollar relative to the USD is not necessarily driven by Canadian specific factors. The Canadian dollar is still relatively strong or a little bit more stable across other currencies, such as the euro, Japanese yen. So we're not seeing that same type of weakness purely because of Canadian factors. It really just is that there's strength in the US dollar, given its reserve currency, its use in international markets from trade perspective. And so when looking at potential risks around the currency's outlook, should tariffs be imposed, it could very well be the case that we see a much softer Canadian dollar, US dollar exchange rate over the next couple of years than we have in our forecast. We're expecting it to kind of hover around the $1.45 Canadian per USD, roughly around a 70 cents US per Canadian dollar. But if tariffs are imposed beyond what we've started to introduce into our forecasts, it is possible to see the Canadian dollar weaken relative to the US dollar much further, close towards $1.50 maybe, or even higher than that. Really, it all depends on what types of tariffs are imposed, how that impacts the Canadian economy. Canadian exports to the US are energy and oil and gas is a huge component of that. Would US consumers and US politicians want to see higher import costs and higher energy costs as tariffs are imposed on Canada's energy sector? maybe not. And so if that's an example of something that's excluded from any tariffs, that may have a different effect on Canada's currency in the international markets as well, right? So the large part of the uncertainty really comes from not necessarily knowing what would be included or not included in scenarios with tariffs, and to what level, how long, are they temporary, short-term, in order to be able to achieve certain policy objectives, or are they a little bit more persistent and longer lasting?
Good. Thanks. Ezra, did you have a question?
I did, yeah, thank you. Hi, John. I'm not sure if you're able to answer it, but would you know how much of Huron County's outputs are exported to the US?
I don't know that myself, but if you'd like, please send me an email and I can look into it and see what data might be available to share.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you, though.
John, I've got a question for you. The last couple of quarters, we've been teetering on the recession side. If we put these tariffs in place and start a bit of a trade skirmish, how fast, or is it realistic to say that we'll end up in a recession? And while we're looking for a soft landing, is that even a possible scenario to maybe worse than that?
That's that's one of the concerns about the different scenarios that incoming U.S. President Trump and his team have been floating various levels of tariffs, threatening anywhere from 5% up to 25%. He might have even had in any campaign mentioned like 100%. All depends. And so really the number that seems to have, I guess, had a lot more traction and concern is the 25% that he keeps repeating. If Canada were to see tariffs of 25% imposed on their exports to the US, that could very well lead to a recession within Canada, and by the end of 2025 even. However, in our scenario where we've only introduced 5% tariffs on half of Canadian goods into the US, we're still expecting growth. We could see growth of around 2% this year, from all of the monetary policy easing and interest rate easing. So, small amounts of tariffs across Canadian goods, depending on how they're implemented, may not necessarily lead to any recession within Canada. Certain markets obviously may be hit a little bit more hard if they were to impose tariffs on, say, automotive sector. And we know that's a huge component across Canada, US, Mexico. That may have a greater impact on Ontario manufacturing than it does, say, on Alberta, just given their presence in oil and gas sector, right? So when we're looking at the possible risks for a recession in Canada, really, if you're seeing very high levels of tariffs that are being threatened, it becomes a much more likely outcome. However, if it's only incremental tariffs or with a lot of exclusions on major parts of Canadian economy, it's a possibility, but not necessarily a likelier outcome.
Right. Okay. Thanks, John. Other questions? Yes, Dr. Lass.
I just wanted to make a quick comment to Ezra. We're more than happy to forward that question to John and get an answer for the entire board. You are also more than welcome to communicate with him, but we will take care of that for the board. Thank you.
Other questions? Oh, Tina?
Thank you. John, when we were reading the package and preparing for today, I saw those 4 charts at the end of your presentation, and I thought, I wonder if that's where most of the questions are going to be, because I think a lot of businesses in the county are concerned about this. But I found them really useful and impressive. Obviously, nobody has a crystal ball, but I think, once we know more, it would be really interesting to have you come back and just do, not that I'm inviting you on behalf of the board, because that's not my role, but if I could say, from a director's position, I think it would be interesting to have another discussion / presentation on this once we know more, because I really liked how you were able to break out the quarter of peak impact, for example. I think that was really helpful. So thank you for those. I think that was my favorite part of your chartful presentation, but I think they're very useful, and be great to have a further discussion on that once we know more after the end of January.
Yeah, thanks very much for the feedback.
Good.
Our team does have quite strong modeling capabilities, so I'll let them know and pass on the
Great.
compliments.
More questions? Well, I'm gonna, oh, Susan?
Thanks, Chair Vincent. I brought Chris Watson into the meeting, our staff support person on this report, as he was the one that brought this forward for us. He does have a couple comments, so if it's okay with the chair, I thought it was imperative that he actually have a moment.
Please, Chris.
Yeah, I just wanted to jump in on a couple things. I guess while we don't have data specifically on how much of what we produce in Huron County goes to the States, I can just comment on the wide open nature of trade between the two countries, particularly within the northern states like Ohio, Michigan, and some of those Rust Belt states that we border on. It's practically an open border right now. Like certainly many of our manufacturers export a lot of their goods to those states. The question I was going to ask John, though, was just about thinking specifically about the tariff impact to I'd say two of our critical sectors, so to agriculture and manufacturing. I think those are certainly the two that concern me most. And then the other question was just whether or not those tariff impacts take into account the idea of the potential for businesses or manufacturers to move from Canada to the U.S.
Yeah, so kind of touching upon that first point, you had mentioned the exposure around agriculture and manufacturing. That's one of the major reasons why we're uncertain about what necessarily will be going forward in terms of tariffs. Some components, such as oil or energy imports from Canada into the U.S. And food and agriculture as well, those types of price pressures and fluctuations and inflationary pressures would be seen quite quickly and quite noticeably. And we've seen over the past couple of years that consumers both in Canada and in the US are much more, I guess, attuned to cost changes and inflation pressures that they see whether it's going to the grocery store or the gas station. And so that's why we've only introduced incremental tariffs into our forecast, just given that until we actually see any risks going forward with the actual implementation of any policy changes, it might not necessarily be politically sustainable or supportive for Trump to be imposing tariffs on Canadian agriculture, Canadian energy. And so it might end up being the case that some of those very interest-sensitive components that are very prominently and upfront and focused for consumers maybe get a pass, whereas manufacturing costs, with the Trump saying that he wants to bring manufacturing back into the U.S., and those generally tending to work with a little bit more of a lag as they work their way through supply chains, that could very well end up being a little bit more of a risk. And how that plays out going forward could also end up being very sector specific and dependent on what types of tariffs, right? What we had seen during Trump's first presidency, imposing tariffs on Canadian steel. And so how that impacted the Canadian economy and manufacturing, we saw a lot less steel trade between the two countries. And then as soon as those tariffs were removed about a year or so later, it took a little bit of time. Obviously, tariffs work with a little bit of lag. And so it's likewise, when you're removing tariffs, you're not going to see necessarily an immediate return. But we did start to see a recovery in steel trade between the two countries. So that's kind of, I guess, how I would address the agriculture and manufacturing component, especially as it relates to, for example, automotive. We're seeing that a lot of businesses are worried about this and trying to bring awareness of how that might impact their international supply chains across Canada, US, Mexico, with the very integrated North American automotive sector, just as an example. And so there might be a lot of pushback from business. How much ends up resulting in businesses completely shifting their supply chain to be located domestically versus internationally, it remains to be seen. In Canada, we have had periods of quite weak business investment, both with low interest rates and higher interest rate period. And so maybe that becomes a factor in terms of how many companies are looking to, for example, if they primarily have consumers in the US, shifting their business model to be a bit more US centric.
Chris, another question?
Just to follow up on you may have already answered this, John, but whether or not the impact of businesses moving from Canada to the US is sort of captured in your analysis.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. So around that, I don't necessarily think we've included that type of scenario or assumption into our forecast. But our forecast also does take into account a lot of the uncertainty, even with absent a lot of the tariffs themselves. The threat of imposing tariffs and the uncertainty of access to markets and how that might play out going forward does weigh on household decisions and business investment decisions, whether it's hiring plans, choosing to expand manufacturing and capital, right? So those uncertainties are captured into our forecasts, and even the uncertainties themselves do come at an economic cost without necessarily introducing the tariffs themselves, but the threat of the tariffs do have their own cost.
Thanks for that, John.
Yeah. Thanks. I see our past warden McNeil has his hand up.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And through you, John, a tremendous presentation, very, very insightful. With what's happened in the past week in Canada, with Parliament being prorogued till the 24th of March, and then subsequently maybe an inability for decision-making at a federal level, how would that play out if, in fact, President Trump does, in his wisdom, implement tariffs to Canada and our inability to respond to them for a period of time?
Yeah, no, that's from a Canadian policy perspective, that is a risk as it relates to international trade going forward, with incoming President Trump taking office by the end of January, having threats of imposing tariffs on day one. The exact capability of governments to be able to respond and how a prorogued government impacts those decisions would probably best be directed towards a public policy analyst. I'm not necessarily a specialist within that area, but we have seen also even premiers having their own discussions across East through West Canada into how they themselves could also play a role. So any uncertainty from a federal perspective, I would not necessarily be the one to be providing appropriate insights, but I don't think that it would have a full drag on how Canada could respond in terms of any trade frictions that would arise over the next couple of weeks.
Thank you.
Okay. Oh, Lynn, have you got a question?
Just a comment, really. I mean, I think, I guess I find it interesting and amusing somewhat that every time Trump's tweeting something in the middle of the night, the entire world is kind of all a flutter with activity, trying to look at all the different scenarios that would result and how to respond. And of course, it's always good to be proactive in those areas. But I think the wild card obviously is him, and what will ultimately happen. And my understanding of the trade tariffs are that if Canada retaliates to any tariffs that he imposes, then they will be just as, it will have a negative impact on the U.S. just as much as it would on Canada too. So that's kind of my basic understanding of it. But I just find it so amusing how everything in the media is so, every time he tweets something, it's like, what's happening in the world? So I think that's the wild card, obviously, and also the wild card of just as Glenn said, what's happening in our own country, and the fact that probably for the next 6 months to a year, the federal government will be in somewhat of a limbo. I expect there'll be an election soon. So anyway, just a comment on all of that. So.
All right, thanks, Lynn. I don't see any other questions, so we'll wrap this up. John, that was just an excellent presentation, and we really appreciate you taking the time. And there's so many scenarios that can happen in the next few months that can change those. But just to draw on your experience and expose it to us is very, very valuable. So thank you on behalf of the board for being here. We much appreciate it.
Thanks very much for having me.
Yes. So we have a motion on our agenda to do with that under 6. If I can have a mover and a seconder for that motion. Moved by Derek, seconded by Lynn. Any more discussion on that motion? All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. All right, very good. Thanks again, John. So we'll move on to 7, which is opening comments from the chair. I just wanted to start off with, again, welcoming the new members that we've got here, Roz and Sweat, and where's everybody else on my screen? Ezra, I'm missing somebody, and John Marshall. Thank you for making the commitment to be on the board. It's much appreciated. I do feel when we volunteer, we get as much out of it personally as what we put in. So it's rewarding, I believe, both ways. We just wanted, as Vicky alluded to earlier, take a second and go around the room, so to speak, and just do a quick 1-minute introduction. I wonder if I'll start, and then we would maybe go to the staff, and then to the county members, and then the board members. So I'm Brian Vincent from Seaforth, and my background is agribusiness. However, my wife has found since I retired that I'm a volunteer-aholic. So if anybody knows of a self-help group that I could join, I would appreciate it. I'll turn it over to Vicky.
Good morning, everyone. I'm the director of the Economic Development Department, and I have experience in not only public service of over 20 years, but the primary agriculture sector, bricks and mortar retail, manufacturing, primarily in food processing, and the food service sector.
Good, thank you. How about CAO work?
Yeah, good morning, everyone. So I think I've met everyone here. My name is Megan Work. I'm the CAO at the County of Huron. Lots of public sector experience, of course. I've been CAO for the last going on 8 years, which is crazy to imagine. Yeah, so oversee staff of about 750, and economic development is one of the many departments that we have. And I just want to indicate how appreciative I am of all of you to provide feedback to our department and subsequently to County Council. This is really important to us. So thank you for your time and your expertise.
Thank you, Megan. How about the Warden Heifer?
Yes, thank you, Brian. My background is my life has been invested heavily in agriculture, and currently still doing that, but also work with my son in a production and manufacturing business in Huron County.
Good, thank you. Past Warden McNeil.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And I've had a little experience in the dairy business. Actually, our son is the 3rd generation in that business, and it's been very, very exciting. And it's been a privilege to be past Warden of Huron County. And I want to compliment our staff, because I do feel that Huron County is very well positioned in relative terms to other counties as far as our economic development and where we are sitting in that regard on so many different fronts. And it is because of the cumulative effort of this board and our staff to implement the programs that places us in the position we are. So thank you very much for that.
Thank you, Glenn. Trevor Bassinet, appointed by County Council.
Good morning, everyone. Glad to be here. Looking forward to working with all of you moving forward in this remainder of this term. Been in municipal politics since 2014. This is my third term with the town of Goderich and my first term with Huron County Council. Little background about myself: born and raised in Goderich. I just turned 50 a few days ago, and I love the community. And I also love Huron County. I'm learning lots on County Council in regards to, you know, the different sectors that we deal with in agriculture as well, and a lot of land severances and things like that. But, you know, my focus as a business owner, I'm in sports and recreation. So I own a business. It's a hockey business that provides over 500 kids, boys and girls, the opportunity to develop their skills here at the Goderich Maitland Recreation Center in the spring season. And, you know, my goal is obviously is to support the local business that we currently have, but also recruit other businesses as well. And I know Vicky's got probably a presentation regarding clean energy, and that's something that I have a big interest in, and especially with the nuclear industry, as well as learning more about what Bruce Power and the Nuclear Innovation Institute has going on, because those are key partners that we can build relationships with that will support Huron County, not just Gray and Bruce, but they will support us here in Huron County as well. So thank you.
Good. Thanks, Trevor. So just starting in the top of my screen then, board members, John Marshall.
My name is John Marshall. I live in Bayfield. My core background is in manufacturing, and my more recent background is in business development.
Thanks, John. Roz Elliott.
Hi, good afternoon, or sorry, good morning, everyone. I always like to say I'm the proud daughter of a Huron County pig farmer, specifically a Stanley Township girl, and formative years in Goderich, Trevor. So I hail from two great townships, but they're all great in Huron County. My primary background is in energy, both distribution and natural gas processing. That was my longtime career, also sometime in health. My focus areas are primarily communications and investor relations and strategy development in the corporate world.
Good. Thanks, Roz. Swet Gandhi.
Hey, my name is Swet. My background is food and restaurant industries. My focus for next 10 years is developing and construction and building new restaurants in a county. Thank you.
Thank you. Derek Van Dieten.
Yeah, I live in Seaforth. I'm the son of an immigrant family. We're involved in a few different aspects across agricultural demographics across the county. We've recently got into a little more of the ag adjacent business of distributing dairy products. My focus in the next 10 years would be leveraging the opportunities we have to grow the business for not just our family, but our families, the other families involved in our businesses. So that's our focus.
Good. Thanks, Derek. Tina Bax.
Hi, everyone. My name's Tina Bax. I also live in Bayfield, and I have a background in educational technology. I sold that company during COVID, and I'm now owner of a landscape business down in St. Joe's, SoCo, south of the county, as I like to call it. Invested in a couple of other businesses in Huron County. And I'm not a business broker. I don't sell businesses, but I know great people who do, like John. And but I do teach a course helping buyers prepare to sell their businesses. So I do a little bit of that in the county. And I would just like to say about this board, I don't know how much volunteer experience you have, but there are magical times to be on certain boards, and this is one of them for this board. We have a really beautiful combination of wonderful, experienced, dynamic staff and great board members. And as Glenn said, you know, Huron County, this is in great shape right now. So we've got a good legacy to continue and a lot of responsibility, but it's going to be a great board experience for you. So welcome.
Thanks, Tina. Ezra Silverton.
Yes. Hi, everyone. I'm Ezra Silverton. I live just on the border of Goderich and Central Huron, but officially in Central Huron. My primary background is in digital transformation and marketing, and I own a couple of different businesses. Looking forward to working with all of you.
Thanks, Ezra. Lynn Harris.
Hi, good morning, everyone. I think I'm a bit of an outlier as a board member. I have absolutely no business experience, period. I am a retired social worker and have had a career working in mostly mental health and healthcare, but also lots of different social services like housing, legal aid, domestic violence. I've lived in Huron County for 28 years, I guess. I spent my first 21 years living in the town of Goderich, and I currently live on the north edge of the county in ACW, just off the lake on a heritage farm settled by my Scottish ancestors and a farmhouse built by my great-grandfather. I also have a lot of board experience and community volunteer experience, so hopefully that's something that I can bring to the board. And I think I'm moving into I think I've done 2 full years on the board so far. So, and I'll just, repeat what Tina said. It is a great board. I learn a lot from these meetings, and yeah, it's a great time to be on it.
Great, thanks, Lynn. I guess the other one here that we haven't talked about is Susan Cronin. That's our clerk that sort of runs things behind the scenes. I call her a silent partner that's not so silent. And oh, there she is, her smiling face.
Yeah.
Do you want to tell us about yourself, Susan? Or should I?
Yeah, so I'm the Director of Legislative Services / County Clerk. I'm the one that talks about rules, procedures, all that stuff. If any of you have any questions about what you should or shouldn't be doing, I am always available to make sure that you stay out of jail. So that's my job. I am just a support for this committee.
Thanks, Susan. So I think that's got everybody. Some of the staff have been in and out, and you'll see more of them as we go along here. Just a couple other things under opening chair comments. An exciting thing that our ECDev department is a finalist in the Economic Development Council Award. We've been nominated for our succession planning project. People on the board before obviously would have seen that involvement. The new people maybe not so much, but it was just an amazing program that was put together, and full kudos to our director Lass and the staff. It really elevated Huron County through the province in our commitment to succession planning, and how that has helped not only in Huron County, but has rolled into other counties as well. Vicky, any more words on that, or?
No, we're just thrilled to be nominated as finalists, and we will find out at the EDCO conference the first week of February whether we won the award or not. So we'll give you an update in March.
Thanks, Vicky. Secondly, our past warden, Glenn McNeil, received a Community Visionary Award from the Southwestern Ontario Isotope Coalition. My gosh, that's great, Glenn. Congratulations from the board.
Thank you very much for that. I'm very fortunate. Thank you.
Yes. The other thing is, most of you likely have seen the email coming out that on January 16th, 9 a.m. till 12, there's a rules and responsibilities Zoom call that it's best if we can all be on it, just to get a little more clarification on what we can do and what we should do, and definitely what we should not do, that sort of thing. And it's a lot of people on the call, and some of it's pertinent, some of it's not, but it's something that the county does to and the local levels to stay up to speed on the correct procedures, that sort of thing. Susan, any more to add to that, or does that cover the waterfront?
Nope, you absolutely covered it. I was happy to have you. John Mascaron is the guest speaker. He is a well-renowned municipal solicitor throughout Ontario. He's excellent, he's entertaining, and if you have any questions regarding your role, he's the man to ask for any information. So I would encourage everybody to attend if possible.
Okay. Thanks, Susan. So that's all I have. Moving on, then 8 is board member comments. If anybody has a comment they want to put out now.
Yeah.
Otherwise, oh, Tina.
Yeah, thanks. I'm trying to figure out how to run this whole room and obviously failing. I just wanted to say that Bayfield has a new doctor in town, which is wonderful. I think she's very close to having to pause taking patients. The response has been quite good and overwhelming. She does house calls, which is incredible. And her standard patient meeting time is 1 hour, which is almost unheard of. So she has a practice in London that she still oversees. She calls this developing her niche practice for the last 10 to 15 years of her career. And she's going to make it exactly what she wants it to be. So we're very happy to have her. She did approach me with some questions about what happens in case of a big emergency, like the power grid fails, those kinds of things. So I don't know, but I'm assuming somebody at the county does. And Vicki, I'll follow up with you afterwards to get her connected with the right person to talk to about that. Yeah.
Good, thanks, Tina. So moving on, then 9 is correspondence. I don't believe we have any correspondence. 10 is 10.1, Huron County Economic Development Board, November 2024 report that was circulated. I'll turn it over to our Director Lass.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and through you. I'm happy to entertain any questions about the report, just to let you know that we do a monthly report that goes to County Council and to this board. Because of the nature of this board not meeting every month, once the report has gone to County Council, we will email it to you so that it is timely in between meetings, but it will then also appear on your agenda, just so you're aware of that. And at this time, I'm more than happy to answer any questions if there are any.
Any questions then? I'm totally amazed when I read that monthly report that we're doing so much. I don't know how we get it all done, but it happens. So thank you to the staff and Director Lass.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Seeing no questions, then we'll move on to 10.2, status of public transit in Huron County, presented by Chris Watson. So I think Chris was in and now he's out, and Susan's going to bring him in, hopefully. There he is, Chris. Thanks for joining us. I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks so much, Mr. Chair. I feel kind of like my days in theater, sort of exiting stage left and coming back in stage right. Yeah, I do apologize. I know it's a bit of a long report. I don't have a formal presentation. I just thought I would maybe just talk a little bit about some of the highlights and updates since that report was presented. Just so you know, this was a report originally presented to County Council in November. The big pieces I just wanted to highlight were that we are in the process of still waiting to hear back from funding from the federal level about undertaking a feasibility study. I think most of you have heard about some of the uncertainties at the federal level these days. So, I have my fingers crossed and I'm optimistic. I'm also realistic about, our likelihood of hearing back on that in the near future. The other piece of this, the major sort of issue happening right now is the community transportation grant that had been funding a lot of the local transit services in and around the area. is no longer continuing. And that shortfall is going to have to be made up by municipal dollars. There is an additional fund that's coming in called OTIF, but it's only for new or expanded services. So it does sort of tie the hands of those that are looking to keep their services going. In terms of how that is going to affect us locally, it's sort of a changing situation. We've just heard very recently that Perth County Council has made the decision to discontinue Perth County Connects. So that was certainly one of the services on our border. The one service that is operating within Huron County, that's the Huron Shores Transit. It's still uncertain at this point as to what's going to happen. My understanding is that they had applied for and were successful in capital funding to assist, but my understanding is that that probably is not going to be enough in the long term, and that they are looking for other sources of operating funds. Beyond that, the 1X bus service that is still currently operating between Port Elgin and London, that goes through Goderich, Clinton, and down sort of the Highway 4 corridor, is continuing to run, but is struggling. Claire Dodds, who is the head of planning and economic development at Bruce County, and I have been sort of chatting back and forth with the folks who run that service. It's our understanding that they hope to be able to, or they would like to potentially delegate to both Bruce and Huron County Council. We're not sure exactly what that's looking like, but we're in touch with that service. So I'm gonna stop there, and I'll just see if that's attracting any questions.
Yep. Trevor?
Yeah, I hear it, a lot often is, we need more public transportation. And, over the years, there's been buses provided. And I almost feel like sometimes, because it doesn't work out right away, it shuts down. And with things like this, it takes time, right? And I'm not sure what 1X is coming to count. Like, I think it's good that they come to Huron County and Grey County and Bruce County and have those discussions. But I'll be curious to hear what they have to say, because as we know, whenever you start up something, things don't, it takes a little bit of time to get momentum, right? And to get the word out. And I'll be honest, like, I've seen a few things about 1X, but I haven't seen a lot. I haven't seen enough to, really make me go, oh, they're out there. Right. And I actually seen a bus in London while I was traveling to London for a Knights game. And it, oh, there it is. Right. But I wish from a marketing point of view, I would see more of it. And maybe we're able to share that stuff. And, what is the cost to go on one of these buses, and, the times, and what does it all involve? Right. Because a lot of people are lazy, unfortunately. So they're not going to take a deep dive into these things. So I think it is a good idea for them to come to Huron County and all the other counties and provide as much information as possible to us. Here in the town, we have one taxi service now, right? We've had Uber approach us for a resolution that we're going to have on our agenda for Monday for some support. But with the legislation with the province, we need to get that passed as well. I think Uber might be a good thing, but in small towns, it's hard to say, right? But I appreciate the report, and I would like to know more information, that's for sure.
Sure. Yes, Roz.
Two comments. First, I agree with Mayor Bazinet in terms of the visibility and the greater awareness of the overall offerings, and I think that is an opportunity that could be explored. My other is a comment directed towards Chris, and just an acknowledgement and a recognition of how important it is that you are participating on the Community Transit Committee in terms of your voice on the technical committee. To have Huron represented with you is tremendous from a stakeholder perspective, and I just want to recognize that.
Thanks for that, Ross.
Good. Yep. Thank you. Yes. Other questions? Comments?
Just to add clarity, if I may,
Yes.
Mr.
Go
Chairman.
ahead, Vicky. Yep.
If Chris could do a short introduction so that the rest of the board members who do not know him quite as well might more fully understand Roz's comment.
I'll do my best. Yeah, so prior to this is actually my second stint with the economic development department here. I had the good fortune to be here between 2017 and 2020. Prior to that, my initial, I guess, vocational training was in civil engineering, and I had the chance to work as a traffic and transportation engineer for about 10 years off and on. So part of this, I mean, I'm by no means an expert in public transit planning or anything like that, but I've definitely had the odd smattering here and there. So there's a little bit of input I can provide now and then. Anyway, yeah, anyway, now I'm catching myself just babbling. So I'm just going to stop right there and just, yeah, feel free to ask questions or anything like that if there's anything else that's coming up.
More questions? I certainly, as we bring more new Canadians into the county, transportation is just a major factor, as we all know, and a cost. And so the more we can do here, the better. And so thank you, Chris, for spearheading that and chasing it. And obviously there's more coming down the pipe that will hopefully help us identify opportunities down the road and make it better for everyone.
Mr. Chair, if I could, I was just going to add one more
Yes.
comment, and I'll just throw this out. I think one of the most important things when we're, as the county or even municipalities are thinking about their role in public transit is to be very strategic about who you're trying to serve and why. It's very important just because the different population and demographics out there that you could potentially try to serve have very divergent needs. So, one of the pieces of research I did have the opportunity to do was looking at transit competitiveness, and it's very difficult for transit to compete even with the car in urban areas that have, very robust public transit systems. So when we think about what we want in a public transit or a rural public transit network, we really need to think about who we're trying to serve and why, and really target that investment to serve that population. That's all I'm going to say.
Good. Well, thank you very much, Chris. Appreciate, yes, Past Warden McNeil.
Mr. Chair, Chris, did you want to expound upon your aviation expertise also?
Absolutely, Past Warden. Sure. Yeah, I was originally in a previous career, I had the opportunity to get at my commercial pilot's license, and I was for a brief period a pilot instructor, and did a bit of flight training both back in my day. I spent a bit of time as a reserve military officer as well, so did a bit of time with the Air Cadet gliding program, both teaching and towing there as well. Anything else there, or should I?
No,
don't let me babble, Mr. Chair, please.
You're very humble, and I thought that everyone should be aware of your aviation expertise.
Thanks so much, Past Warden.
Good. Well, thank you, Chris, for drawing that out. So seeing no more questions, thanks again, Chris. And we have a motion 10.2 printed in our agenda. If I could have a mover and a seconder for that motion, moved by Roz, seconded by Trevor. Calling the question, all those in favor? Opposed? Carried. And our first glitch of the morning is that Susan Cronin, the clerk, did not kick me in the shins to make sure we did the motion for 10.1. I can't believe you were biting your tongue that much.
It's a new year. I've got a resolution to absolutely not. I was aware. I have some notes here, and I was going to make you go back and do it. So
yes.
Can we deal with 10.1?
Yes, 10.1. Then we have a motion on the agenda accepting the report by our Director Lass. If I could have a mover and a seconder for that. Moved by Jamie, seconded by Derek. Any more discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? And carried. There, I'm now back in the clerk's good books. Well, as good as possible. 10.3 investment attraction and clean energy update presented by Director Lass. I'll turn it over to you, Vicki.
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Chair. I will entertain questions, but I am trying to be sensitive to board members who may not be completely conversant yet in the way we do business or the acronyms that we use or the references that we make. So I just want to highlight a couple of things for you from the report. In opportunity number 1, development along the ag value chain, just once again, the work that we've been doing around farm succession planning, that's related to the EDCO award that was mentioned earlier. And I was remiss to not thank the board members who participated in that project. So Roz Elliott was our host for 6 podcasts that we developed interviewing local farm families. And she did a wonderful job as host in hosting those podcasts. Derek Van Dieten participated as one of the interviewees when we looked at the next generation farmer. And Past Warden McNeil also participated in those podcasts as a founder father. So 4 of the podcasts were focused on the people who sit around the table in those farm family discussions: founder mother, founder father, next generation, and next generation in-law. So you'll sort of get the flavor that not only do you come to meetings and listen to official reports, we will be tapping you on the shoulder to participate in things. One of the reason we're focusing on succession planning is that although Huron County has a higher rate of succession plans in primary agriculture than the Canadian trend, we still have over $10 billion in capital assets unprotected through succession plans. And although some people would note that even if the family lost control of the farming operation, the land would probably still remain in agriculture. But we do have concerns over ownership. There is, when the land is in the current ownership, we find the overwhelming trend is to manage for a triple bottom line. Obviously, profit, that's what makes us sustainable. The environment and, of course, soil health is extremely important to profit, but also our farmers tend to follow the ethic of Huron County in environmental stewardship, so also tend to manage for land and, for ground and surface water, as well as woodlot maintenance and canopy maintenance. And then also our farm community tends to also manage for a community bottom line. And so you'll notice as you're involved in the community, a number of our primary agricultural producers step up to volunteer either with our youth through groups like 4-H, to participate in municipal politics, to volunteer in service clubs. There is a trend right now that investment companies are buying farmland. And that is not to say that they would not manage on a triple bottom line, but their primary objective is to manage for profit. So we want to make sure that our farm families have the opportunity to do successful transition planning. And even if the farm does not remain in the family, that they have a choice of where that farm management goes next. So the project offered a number of resources to the farming community to be able to open those very difficult and somewhat emotionally fraught conversations, to move through transition or succession planning, and to offer the opportunity to consider that succession planning is really about stepping back, not stepping out. So that's a quick update on that project. The other points of clarity that I wanted to give you in option 2, I refer to MEDCAT. That is Ministry of Economic Development, Job Creation and Trade. And our small business center, our Huron Business Center, receives funding through that ministry to operate. So it is jointly funded by Huron County and MEDCAT. So when we noted that we are in discussions with MEDCAT to point out that succession planning is an important part of what we do, because we receive funding, we are funded for specific deliverables, and that succession or transition planning element It has never been one of our deliverables, and yet we are finding more and more requests for that service. So we're in conversation to make sure that that is a metric we can be funded for, because it is taking, pardon me, time in a number of our requests for business coaching come from that area. And fourth, I just want to note that we use the term shovel ready. So when land is shovel ready, that means that it is zoned appropriately, it is available for sale, it has any studies completed on it that might be necessary, and it has services up to the property line. So that's what we consider shovel ready. So right now, the majority of our shovel ready land is in the industrial park in Goderich. So I just wanted to give you some of that background and those definitions so that you're aware, and I would be happy to answer questions at this point.
Great. Questions for Director Lass?
Can I say something?
Yep. Who's oh, Tina.
Tina.
Sorry.
Sorry, I couldn't find the button again to raise the hand. So I just, in reading the report, I just would like to say to the new members, this is really meaty. I mean, I think if you really want to look at board priorities, this is it. This report says pretty much everything. And there's not one line or point form in there that doesn't have a lot of meaning. So if I were new, I would have loved to have received this and just looked at it. And if you read that and really understand everything about it, you'll have a very good handle, I think, on what the board's been up to and what the priorities are. It's great timing for that report. Thanks, Vicki.
Yes, Roz.
Thank you.
Yeah, just two comments and observations. Thank you for saying that, Tina. I couldn't agree more. It was very meaty. That's a great pithy understanding. First, Vicki, I have to say the distinction of investment readiness versus investment attraction, I don't think that can be stated enough. It is so enticing to jump to attraction, but the whole readiness, the shovel ready, all that aspects is such important work and necessity that we often underestimate it. So I thought you calling it out was so imperative. And the second point I just want to draw to is my two loves. One is agriculture, having grown up in the agricultural world, and second is energy. And when they come together in the beautiful value chain of anaerobic digestion, and I get excited about that. I'm kind of a geek that way. There is just such opportunity, and it is an area of great strength for our county in that whole value chain. And I'm really excited that we're going to explore that. And we have such depth and breadth and just incredible leadership and visionaries in the county. So it gives me great promise. I just wanted to make that comment.
Good. Great comments, Roz. Any other questions?
Through you, Mr. Chair. I just want
Yes.
to note that if board members have questions after the board, if they've dug into the report and they find they have questions, they can feel free to reach out to me. And if there are questions that we feel the entire board should have the answer, we'll bring them to the next meeting. And also, please catch us if we use acronyms that you don't understand. They're very commonplace. We can do a whole sentence in acronyms. So let us know if we're doing that to you, please.
So true. All right, any other comments, questions? Otherwise, we'll,
Chair,
Tina, is
Chair
that your hand?
Vincent, Tina has a question.
Yes.
Thanks again. So
Tina.
Roz, when you were saying that, pardon me, made me think of something that I heard on a podcast the other day. And this really got me interested, or made a connection for me about clean energy that maybe somebody else doesn't know either. So I think it's worth repeating, is that with the advent of ChatGPT and OpenAI and all those technologies, when we use those technologies and we ask or form a query, it takes something like 100 times the amount of draw from search engines, or energy is the connection. It takes 100 times the amount of energy to fulfill that AI query than it does to do a Google search. So the podcast is called Prof G. It's Scott Galloway, and he did his 2025 predictions. And he talks about this need for really looking at clean energy and nuclear power, not just to fulfill the needs that we have had, but to fulfill the growth in these open AI technologies, which I thought was pretty cool.
Good comment. Yes, Trevor.
Is there any way that link could be shared with the board for that podcast?
Yeah, I'll think about it.
Think about
Yeah,
it.
for sure.
Okay.
I'll put it out to, I guess it would be to Susan or to Vicky.
I do
Vicky
have the link, and
Okay.
so we'll
Okay.
take care of getting that shared.
Excellent, and thank
you.
you for thinking about it.
All right, seeing no more questions or comments then, there's a motion in the agenda 10.3 to accept that report. If I could have a mover and a seconder for that. Lynn and John, any more discussion on the motion? All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Thank you very much. So moving on, 10.4 is the Starter Company Plus 2024 program report. We're lucky enough to have Tricia with us, and I will turn it over to her.
Thank you. Yeah, Starter Company 2024, a report. I hope you all had a chance to dig into the details and meet some of our fantastic participants. This year we had 11 businesses that received some funding with a wide scope of businesses represented, anything from landscaping to auto repair, legal services, different areas represented, and a really good spread throughout the county as a whole as well. All of our municipal partners were represented with the exception of Blue Water. And it's interesting year to year, we do, very similar approaches to spreading the word, and it just kind of is a mixed bag on who is interested in taking advantage of the program. But I'm open to any questions that you might have following the report.
All right. Questions for Tricia? Yes, Past Warden McNeil.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. As opposed to a question, it's a comment. Great work with that. Like to provide the opportunity for businesses to start up. That is so amazing because everyone needs a start. And actually, one of the recipients of that starter program was Kiefer King, who does detailing on vehicles, and mine needed to be done. And so I provided him that opportunity. He did an amazing job, and it is great for all that are involved in that program. So well done, Trish.
Good. Thanks for the comments. Trevor.
I share the same sentiment. I believe maybe a few years back, Sydney Pollock was part of that. And now you look at her, she has her own business on West Street here in Goderich. And it's because of initiatives like this that build that confidence within those certain individuals. So it is so vital and so important because you look, now we have new possible entrepreneurs because of what's happening here. So excellent work.
Good.
Just one comment I wanted to add is the name of the program can be a bit deceiving, and we've had some terrific success with startup. This intake in particular, we saw 6 startups, but 5 actually were in the growth stage. So my observation as being the lead on this program is this program assists those that are looking to start up. But I've seen a lot of bringing stability to current businesses that, as an entrepreneur myself, I think we do a lot of fake it till we make it when we're in business and figuring out as we go along. So this program in particular has been beneficial to startups, but also to those businesses that are maybe 1-2 years in and just kind of been doing it alone, and they can come into a training program and really get their foundation set to allow them to grow. And the feedback we've received from participants, particularly with the financial literacy piece, again, we start businesses because we have a passion for something. We don't necessarily have all of those skills. We learn them as we go. So this program, for me, as observing of it, has been really beneficial to both of those kind of segments of business.
Good comments. Thanks, Tricia. Anything else then?
Tina has a comment.
Tina, man, oh man.
Thanks for saving me. I have to say, because it's not appropriate for Trish to say it herself, but I sitting on the panel, I really noticed a difference this year, even from last year, and they were great pitches last year as well. But every single participant, and they didn't have to say this, every one of them thanked Trish for the coaching and the support that she gave them. And I know someone who started the program and had to drop out, and even he thought Trish was fantastic. In terms of the financial literacy, I found it much easier to absorb the packages this year. They were more financially prepared, and everything was more homogeneous. So that was great as a judge and a participant. But I think it really taught the participants more as well, and they just seemed stronger and more knowledgeable about their finances, which was fantastic. And here's why this really matters, in my opinion. The Small Business Center is often the gateway drug to accessing Huron County AcDev services. And it's really important. And so I always worry about funding for it, how we're going to keep it open. I don't know how the people that staff that center do what they do, because they also have lives and kids, and sometimes things are not easy with our lives and our kids. So it's remarkable work gets done there, just remarkable. And because it's so outward facing, I think it's really critical. So like Trish, I can't imagine a better job. Really kudos. Fantastic. Thank you.
Oh, thank you for that.
Good observations, Tina. Thank you. And thank you, Tricia, for all that you do. It's
thank you for those kind words.
Great support. Yes. Director Lass.
Through you, Mr. Chair, just one comment about, you'll notice a change this year that we are striving for better, more meaningful metrics. And in the report, you'll notice that we were able to comment on investment to date, because we do have those businesses that are growing, and those that are starting up have made their own personal investments. We are able to report on jobs created through these businesses, and also annual revenue. And based on projections, those jobs will grow, and the annual revenue is projected to double next year amongst these businesses. So that is also a credit to Tricia. I just challenged her that we needed to look at better, more impactful metrics to show the value to Huron County of their investment in this business center. And we're very pleased with the metrics and the process for collecting those that she has created, because we want to make sure we're reporting well, but that it's not our full-time job either. So, I'm pleased with the metrics we're able to offer you this year, and we'll be continuing to perfect those. And thank you to Tricia for that work.
Good. Thanks, Director. Yes, absolutely. Those numbers are crucial to, proving that the program is working and help justify it in the future. So it is challenging to measure those things for sure, but it needs to be done for sure. So, all right. So seeing nothing more, then thanks again, Tricia, for your presentation. And 10.4, then we have a motion on the agenda. Can I have a mover and a seconder then to accept that motion? Moved by Derek, seconded by Trevor. Any more discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. All right, thank you very much. Moving on then to 10.5. 2024 Supporting Local Youth Program. We have Rick, I see, just sat down with Tina. We'll turn it over to his guiding hands.
Good morning.
Morning.
Yeah, I didn't really have much to report on, just here to answer any questions about the SLIP program and the 6 projects that we funded, if anybody on the board had any questions regarding.
Yes, Trevor.
No question. Just it seems to be a usual comment here. Thank you for the work, and it is so important to engage with our youth. And what I see here being done is exactly that. You know, we all know the youth is our future, and their voice is important, and their voice should be heard. And providing these programs and everything that we've done here in the county, I think we're taking it to the next level, which is nice to see. You know, years ago that wasn't happening. And now there's a better understanding of how important it is to provide this for our youth moving forward. So I just want to say thank you and great work.
Yes.
Yeah,
Certainly. Go ahead, Rick.
To that comment, thanks to the ECDEV board for supporting this pilot project of doing this youth funding program for 2024. I think we got better results than we anticipated going in, and I believe it's on the docket to run again in 2025, subject to budget approvals.
Correct.
Good. Tina?
So one of the things I love about working with you, Rick, is your insight into things. So could you just give us a little bit, like just a little bit of your feeling of like, were you really impressed with the pitches and the applications? Were there any hard decisions? Like, are you happy? It seems to me like there's a really nice spread in terms of types of projects.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't see any theater, which I was surprised by, but I just wondered how it went.
Where are those musical theater kids? We'll get them next time. One of the insights I think all of us had who were reviewing the applications was just how optimistic the applications were.
Good.
I think we had 9 in total. We approved 6. All of them had one thing in common, is that what they were saying they could do with $1,000 was a lot, way too much. All of them had like, we're going to do these 50 different things if we get the funding. So the work that we've done since they got notification as approvals is I've been talking to some of them about their work planning, going like, just bring it in a little bit. Yeah, we don't expect you to do all of those 50 things with $1,000. But I think that's one of the values, is they'll learn how far your project budget will go and what's actually doable on that kind of timeline and budget that they have. So it's a good learning curve.
Okay.
But they all were very optimistic at how much they could do with $1,000.
It doesn't say in the report how many applications we had, does it?
I think I said we had 9.
Okay.
Yeah, we did have 9, and 6 were approved by the review panel.
Great. Okay, so you're happy
Yes,
and you
Roz.
recommend we do it again?
Go ahead, Roz.
Again, just a comment about the tremendous contribution that this effort makes, and an observation. I'm grateful to be working with Vicky on another podcast on workforce development, and one of the insights I've had from interviewing our youth who are newly in the workforce, and they're late teens, early 20s, is just how impressive they are and how insightful they are. And I'm hopeful that as we, and I know we already do this, but that we continue to include our youth and our newly adult workers in as stakeholders, as input on committees, etc., because they've shown how incredible they are in this effort, and it would be nice to see their voice throughout as we look at ownership of issues going forward. And we've seen that with Engage Goderich. Trevor, I know you're very close to that, and we've seen the wonderful insights they offer. So I'd like to continue to see that and encourage that across the board.
Absolutely. Yes, Director Lass.
Just through you, Mr. Chair, a quick update. The Youth Workforce Podcast went live on December 16th, so you can find it on Huron County's Life on the Coast podcast channel.
Good, thank you. Any more comments, questions? I would just add in, as Rick said, it's, while we don't have a lot of money to invest, a small amount of money, being seed money, going into these types of projects can accomplish so much and encourage youth. And, people then invest a sweat equity and bring money in from other places. And that's, one of our best rules is just to continue to support and encourage and bring those businesses along. and help them develop. So yes, I think it was well done, Rick.
Thank you.
Anyway, not seeing any other questions, then there's a motion on our agenda 10.5 to accept this report from Rick. Can I have a mover and a seconder for that? Tina and Derek. So calling the question then, all those in favor of the motion? Opposed? Carried. Thanks, Rick, again. So 11, financial statements are not available. I don't believe we have anything necessary for close to the public session. So moving along then, our 13 next meeting will be on Thursday, March the 6th at the Economic Development Office in Goderich at 9 a.m. Hopefully we can be there face to face. So makes it a lot easier to run a meeting and have input from everybody. So
Hey, I was here.
yeah. Well, had I known that, I would have drove up and sat with you then.
Thanks, Brian.
Anything else then, Vicky?
Councillor Bazinet has a comment.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, go ahead,
curious.
Trevor, sorry.
No, it's okay. Will there be calendar invites sent out for these future meetings in advance? Just speaking from my personal, my calendar fills up. So the quicker I can get these implemented in my calendar, then I know if it's something that we are required to do on our own, by all means, I can do that. But I was just curious if the ECDEV, it gets sent to us as members from someone else.
Susan?
Member Bazinet, the Council of the County of Huron did approve the calendar in September. So all of these meetings are in there, which will include the library board meetings as well as these board members. If you'd like, I can circulate the calendar itself and you can input those into your calendar.
I'll just input them myself. Just curious as to how it works, because there's committees that will send it out to me.
Yeah.
And I just accept it as a yes, I'll be there, but I can definitely I'm quite capable of doing it on my own. Thank you, Clerk.
I completely understand that you have that capability. So I will circulate the calendar and you can select all the meetings and put them in your agenda or in your calendar for you, okay?
The other thing you will get will be an invitation to come to a Zoom meeting for anybody that needs to come in remotely. Although that will only be 4 days before the meeting. So absolutely everybody should enter this into their calendar earlier to make sure they mark that date and that time off. Yep, good question. All right, well, seeing nothing else then, we've got a motion to adjourn the meeting at 14.1. Can I have a mover and a seconder then to do that? Moved by the warden, seconded by John Marshall. Seeing no more discussion, all those in favor of the motion? And opposed? Carried. So I think that is our first 2025 meeting wrapped up. It was really appreciate everybody's involvement and attendance and doing it via Zoom. I know it creates some challenges and that sort of thing, but it is one way to make sure we get the meeting done and keep the agenda going ahead, and also keeping our clerk happy. That's important to me. So anyway, thank you very much everyone for being here, and we will see you in March. All right.
Thanks all. Thanks everyone.